at work. My guest today, Christian, I'm glad you're on.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I've got a little title blurb at the bottom that's got your name on there. So in case some people are not familiar with your work, I've followed your work for a while. I was a big fan of The Trench. I love the Trench series.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was quite inspiring. As I was not into filmmaking at the time, and now I mostly do filmmaking.
Awesome.
But it was really encouraging. I want to see more stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, that was definitely the golden era of YouTube, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, really, that was just when it reached its high point for sure. It's been all downhill since then.
So before we get into today's topic on youth ministry, do you mind giving a short bio, who you are, what you do with the GOA, and just in case someone doesn't know who you are?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Christian Gonzalez, and who I am is a husband and a father to 3 daughters. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and let's see, what else? I am very excited for the new Star Wars movie. That's a thing that I'm super pumped about.
Yeah.
And what I do to pay the bills working for the GOA is I'm the Young Adult Ministries Coordinator. And what that kind of means is looking overall at the state of things for young adult ministry, and really trying to conceptualize for us, like, what would it look like to actually be doing effective ministry with young adults. For the last several years, I've been doing a podcast called We Are Orthodoxy, and we interview, and it's on Ancient Faith Ministries. And what I do is I interview young adults from different walks of life, but who've all kind of had their lives intersecting with the Orthodox Church in some way at some point. So they might not even currently be going to Orthodox Church anymore, but we do want to talk with them just to say, like, okay, hey, what was your experience like in the church, and why do you still go? Why do you not go anymore? And those are the kinds of questions that we're asking, and super curious about, and have had just a whole lot of really incredible engagement with that series in particular. So that's what I do for the GOA. I'm also a part-time therapist. I'm a licensed associate marriage and family therapist. So I do some work with individual men and with couples mostly as well. So I do get a little bit of just like face-to-face engagement with people, and it's not just like sitting in front of a computer and like clickety clack clack clack, like ministry typing. So yeah.
Okay. It's interesting. I wonder if you have the same perspective. It feels like roughly 5 years ago, and I can't really pinpoint it, there was this huge shift within several jurisdictions to start looking at young adult ministry. And I don't know, I haven't been watching that tide or that wave that closely, but it kind of feel like, and it's really cresting in a sense of some certain operations and programs and projects that I've been monitoring myself. Is that kind of your perspective, that this rising wave of awareness of young adult ministry?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Totally honest, I guess I never really explicitly thought about that. But I think you're right, kind of like more I think in retrospect, because I do feel like even as I was getting started in youth ministry, and I've been in youth ministry for full time for the last 10 years. So that's really kind of been my primary career, right? Is just like thinking about how do we minister to young people. And for sure, even as I came in, the questions were more directed about adolescents and wondering what their particular life stage was about and what they needed and how to reach them. But then I think that what we started seeing, and of course, unfortunately, right, is people were far more reactive than we are proactive. And so I think that as we're ministering to young adults like 13 through 17, or to adolescents 13 through 17, what happens is then they graduate high school. And so they graduate their youth groups, and they graduate all the other kind of programs that are available to them. And then all of a sudden we see 18 and beyond, like there's not really anything that gives the appearance of keeping them anchored to the church in some capacity. And so they fall out of it, or they drop away from it. And so I think now then, the flags go up and everyone's like, crisis, 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 danger. All the young adults are falling out of the church. And maybe one of the things that I've been wondering about is if that problem is one that actually has begun way before that. If that's just the waterfall at the end of the river that has been escorting young people out of the church from the time that they were little, but because they were in the river, we kind of felt okay about it. Like, oh, in the water, at least they look like they're swimming and they're waving their arms around. But I think it actually turns out that they're drowning and heading over the edge of the waterfall. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing now. And all of a sudden we're kind of getting more reactive and saying, let's do something about this.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that something starts to happen around 7 to 9 years old that can be a strong trajectory. It's not a guarantee, but it can really start to lay a foundation for which direction they're going to head. If they have some around that age, they start wondering, like, why does God send bad people, people to hell, or is God real? Or they start to develop some kind of a large question in their life. There might have been some kind of traumatic experience, and someone close to them died, or a divorce happens, right? And so these questions start to develop. That's what I've seen. And by the time they're in high school, they've kind of decided where they're going to get those answers. And so I've been trying to figure out that phase from 7 to 16, like what's having that impact. And then I'm guess I'm pretty excited. A friend of mine, Deacon Merrick Simon, is now the executive director of OCF. And so and he knows that OCF has tremendous potential, and he wants to realize that. And I'm praying for him daily, because I think that college ministry is important. But yeah, it's interesting that it's to think about this whole spectrum of, that little child all the way to the young adult age. You touched on something pretty important. I'm a fan of, like, looking at the big picture. I actually have a question for you related to that.
Yeah.
It's very different doing youth ministry in a parish setting and versus at the archdiocese level, and kind of having like that 30,000 foot view from the airplane, right? America looks different from the satellite image versus down on the ground. And we need people up in the air, kind of like looking over, the big picture. That's kind of how I picture you, I'm guessing, is looking at that big picture model. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Although I think probably, like, Ron Swanson would disagree that we need, like, satellite images of things. He's not a fan of Google Earth, so he wants.
Do you want to explain the pyramid for someone who might not understand the reference?
Yeah, so here we go. Right, we've got the Swanson pyramid of greatness here, just hovering, kind of giving inspiration and lending credibility, really, to me. I mean, as you can see, that austere look on his face definitely is there to support me and guide me.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Ron.
All right. So onto that big picture view. I'm kind of a big picture person as well.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
I can get in there. I love to get in there and experiment and test things. But I think when I retreat back into, like, planning or let's do some blueprints, I love that big picture perspective.
Yeah. I think that the big picture perspective, I think, is definitely something that I just sort of can't help but go to. Like, I can't help but think of things in terms of kind of grand narratives and grand metaphors, and trying to see how everything in the entire cosmos is connected to one another, right? Like, I can't not think that way, almost to the point where I drive, like, my friends and family crazy, because, like, one little thing happens and I'm like, let's think about that a little bit. Like, it's just too much for anybody. But yeah, I think that one of the things that I really value about the work that we get to do at the Archdiocese is we do get to really ask big questions, and we get so many kind of those one-on-one encounters that I think are also really important, because it's one thing to talk about, like, the general, right? Like the like generalities and kind of overarching themes and big picture stuff. But if it's not touching home in the real and lived experiences of people, then, like, who cares? Who cares about, our theoria, right? When the praxis is totally lacking, when there's nothing to actually to give the thing substance. So we need some sort of materiality to these things. So what I appreciate in kind of the role that I feel that I get to kind of go back and forth between is, since I work with Steve Christoforou, and he and I travel around the country at least once a month. We go to a different place and lead B2B retreats. And we get to interact with, he does like a retreat stuff for 6th through 12th graders. And I get to spend the day with adults of the parish, youth workers and parents, and just anyone who's really concerned about young people in the church. And we get to develop these relationships and have conversations with people. And then again, on We Are Orthodoxy, I get to talk to people and ask them questions about their experience in the church. And what you begin to see is there just becomes these patterns that begin to emerge, and things that you begin to hear. You're like, oh, that's familiar, right? Like that sounds like something that I need to think about. Like one of the things that continually comes up in We Are Orthodoxy, whether people go to the church or not, and this is over and over and over and over and over again. I've done 40 interviews, and almost in every single one of them, nobody ever cites like that they just didn't like the liturgy as a reason to leave the church. Like never, ever, never once has that been a thing that people are like, well, liturgy just wasn't really my thing. Like, I mean, you maybe get that in one of them a little bit, that they prefer kind of like the more, Protestant evangelical kind of thing. But even then, they still feel like there's like this reverence and this sacred thing that's happening in the liturgy, even though they might not believe in Orthodox. Like one guy he's just pretty much stopped believing in Christ altogether. And yet he says almost in the same breath, but I think it's good for people to worship. And my question was, worship what? Like, what do you mean? Like, if you don't believe in this God, you don't believe in Jesus, but he couldn't get away from, there's something inside of him that still says like, it is good to worship, and it's good to have reverence, and it's good to believe that something is sacred. And I think that that's the kind of stuff that, we get to see from the archdiocesan level, as those themes emerge, and continue to push people more to lean into those themes, as opposed to, moving toward like the head. Because I think that's a lot of what we do in our ministries. Like we think like, oh, well, they don't have the information, so if we can just like pound it into them and get them to believe all the doctrines and tell them the history of the church and like, facts, then they won't leave the church, right? If they just know their things, if they kind of have some sort of assurance or certainty, or just something that's like concrete and hold on toable as fact, right? But we forget as a church that our life is in mystery, not in certainty. Like we're not about like, certainty, 100% black and white, but we call these things the life-giving mysteries. And I think that like that's the kind of thing that we probably need to really lean into and reclaim, is the mysterious reality of our faith, that there isn't such a thing as just like certainty, right? Okay, so certainty is not the answer to doubt. I don't think, in any of these things, trying to offer people like certainty, I don't think that's the answer to doubt. I think that dialogue with doubt is the path to faith, right? Like I don't know that just trying to like convince somebody of anything to go. So that was kind of a roundabout way of answering your question. But
no, well, I feel like every time there's public discourse on Orthodox, we have to reference C.S. Lewis. But
totally.
that was where it was C.S. Lewis, I have to admit, was the one that changed my perspective on. He was the first person I read on doubt. Not that, I mean, we have plenty of other Orthodox saints and writers that have written on doubt, but he just happened to be the first one. And he, when he positions it as an opportunity to deepen your faith, that it's not a problem. It's a natural phase that you're going to continue to find different doubts, in your life. And that means that's an opportunity to push through and explore and deal with it.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
Yeah.
There's a fella named Charles Taylor, who wrote a tome of a book called A Secular Age. And it's 900 pages long, and I have not yet had the courage to read entirety, because I'm afraid it'll probably take me until I die. But there is a gentleman named Jamie Smith who wrote a kind of like a Cliff Notes version of that book called How Not to Be Secular. And in that book, he talks about really what it what it looks like and means for us to inhabit what we call our secular age. And the way that he kind of conceptualizes it is, like, generally speaking, when people talked about something being secular, they mean it to be non-religious, right? Like, it's non-religious, it's rational, it's objective, it's scientific, all of that kind of stuff. And so anything sacred has to be removed from the secular sphere in order to kind of maintain its rational objectivity. That's what we tend to think of in terms of, like, the word secular is simply as non-religious. So we can refer to people as secular, music is secular, all of this kind of stuff. But what he ends up pointing to is that really what it means for us now is not so much this divide between the sacred and the secular, but rather that all of our experience has been completely flattened and made immanent. That the world that we exist in, kind of our imaginary of seeing the world, is totally flat. And so we've created this, what Taylor calls the immanent frame, and we've become enclosed in this kind of like box of a world that's really kind of like the birth child of the Enlightenment and modernity and like all of this kind of stuff. And we're just enclosed in this universe of harsh materialism, right? Where people die and they go into the grave, and that's that. That's really our felt sense of the world, is that it's been flattened. And Taylor says that's too oppressive for human beings. So even though we have a sense that this is all that there is, we also have this other sense that this is not all that there is. And so we're stuck between this cross pressure, he says, of like immanence and transcendence. This is all that there is, and there's more to this. And in between that, we're stuck with belief and doubt. And so we have all of these kinds of things just like squishing in on us and pressing in on us in our secular age. And so for Taylor and Smith following him, he would say that we're always going to believe while doubting, that we're always going to have some kind of doubt. We're always going to be plagued by it now in our secular age, because we look around and we see people who don't believe in God and they seem perfectly happy, and they're not possessed by demons. And like we go, maybe, I don't know, maybe they're actually a nicer person than I am, and they're an atheist, and they don't run red lights, and they don't need Jesus to do that, like to stay in good behavior or whatever. So
yeah,
I don't know.
I don't know what you want to talk about next, but at some point we need to get to a story. I know I'm anxious to hear one of your stories. And then the other thing I'm curious about, and I'll let you kind of respond. I'm also going to let you close out with whatever you feel like we missed that we need to talk about. But the second thing that I think that maybe a lot of people are interested in, because anybody watching your department is seeing a lot of activity, which I love. I love that you're doing. We have to be doing something, right?
Yeah.
That's what our departments are supposed to be doing something.
Yes.
But I think what would be interesting to hear from you guys is, how do you know that what you're doing is working? If you're going to go into a project, what are, for lack of a better word, a litmus test or anecdotal evidence or testimonies, or what kind of helps you guys steer the ship of the department? Because it is kind of like steering a barge, when you're steering a department, and when you're going to go all in for a couple of years on something. I'm curious kind of what those markers are that helps guide you guys in knowing that we really believe this is going to have an impact on, the young adults or the teens or even maybe right at preteen 13 age.
Yeah.
So those are that's what's left for me. I'd love a story. Love to hear kind of about like how you guys keep in check with yourselves. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced from the outside perspective, you guys hold yourselves accountable. Like you really have this standard that you're living up to. And I love that. And I think other people see that as well. Mm-hmm. So they're curious about that. I think they're curious about how you're working. So I don't know what direction you want to take it from here, but those are kind of we have about 10 minutes left.
Sure.
I don't know which one you want to plow into next.
So I'll just kind of go for all of them.
Okay.
So in terms of, how we know what we're doing is effective, I mean, that's a really good question. How does anybody really ever know that what they're doing is effective? I mean, yeah, there's like metrics of things, and I mean, certain kinds of, I have a planner from Michael Hyatt and Company, right? And tons of people buy it, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that it's effective. It just means that a lot of people want it to be and are hoping that it will be. But is it effective? I mean, you kind of have to know it by its fruit. Like if you use it and then it does something, then yeah, it's effective. But and it might be effective for other people who are more responsible than me. you know, but so there's several days where I don't put anything in it because I just am running around like a chicken with my head cut off. But I mean, in some ways, right? Like you have to know by the fruit, like from what you see coming from it. And I think part of the way that we've seen fruit being born from our work is that, you know, even just like right now, like people keep asking us to do things, and like they're still interested in what we're saying and what we're putting out there. They're telling us that they're encouraged by it. They're telling us that, you know, the insight that we've brought into some of the questions that are being asked in ministry has really helped guide them and shape their parish ministries. We know that people are downloading our resources, that we, you know, there's those kinds of things. And we get messages from people saying like, you know, B2B was instrumental in me kind of going down the rabbit hole of orthodoxy and then eventually entering the church. We get all of these different kinds of stories from people. But in terms of like our vision, I think for ministry, because a lot of times what has been, you know, the question that everybody asks and the question that plagues church people is, how do we keep our kids in the church? Mm-hmm. That's really the question that keeps church people up at night. But even what I said earlier, right, with kind of like this flattening of the world, our idea of what that means is, how do we keep them out of the secular realm and keep them in the sacred realm? So it's very much this kind of like flattened thing. So like, instead of going to parties on Saturday night, we want them to be in the pews on Sunday morning. So how do we do that? But the question that we don't really find ourselves asking as church people, and I think this is really unfortunate, and I think it's something that we're going to have to answer for. The question I don't think that we should be asking is, how do we keep our kids in the church? I think the question that we need to be asking is, how are we going to facilitate encounters with the divine? Because I think that's the only thing that can actually break the brass ceiling that we've constructed that is actually really boring to people, that makes orthodoxy feel flat. It turns it into this cultural expression and makes us make things that with like bumper stickers that say Orthodox Christianity 2,000 years, as if the power of orthodoxy is in our history rather than in our future, which is the kingdom of God. And like, I think that is where a compelling vision for ministry occurs, is as we reach beyond the brass ceiling that we've constructed, and instead of turning back always toward antiquity, if we were to actually reach for eternity, I think that we would start seeing some more compelling ministry happen. And I think that we would see ministries breaking out of that and kind of creating, you know, skylights in the brass ceiling or whatever, like ways where the divine, it begins to break through, which is really everything that we've tried to do with all of it, right? Is how do we find, I mean, B2B, the tagline is finding God in everything every day. The Trench was all about finding Christ in our relationships. All of this is like this looking for him and reaching for him. And so one of the things even that, you know, that a practice that I really love to do with kids and what I've done on retreats. So I led a winter camp in January, I guess, of this year. I went to Camp St. Raphael, yeah, boy, and got to be with them for the weekend, which was really, really awesome. And part of the last thing that we did, one of the last things we did was late at night on, I want to say, I don't know, whatever, like with one of the last nights or whatever, we did this thing where we went up into the chapel and all of the lights were off, and all around the chapel were just like candles. And that was the only light in the room. It was just candles everywhere. And in the middle of the floor was a map of the world. And surrounding that were different candles as well. And so what we then did is, from all around the room, different people, especially because, you know, Duomo is so amazing in terms of their involvement from all around. Like, it's not just like one little region. You've got people from Dallas, you got people from Houston, people from Wichita, like they're all super involved. And so I found facts about like homelessness and poverty and suffering, all this kind of stuff that was going on in their home cities. And so I had them read those stories aloud. And then at the very end of it, the volunteers, the counselors would say, who would like to pray for the city of Dallas? Who would like to pray for the homeless of Wichita? All of this kind of stuff. And then we kept going and reading about other things like fatherlessness in America and the rate of alcoholism across the world, and all of these different kinds of ways that, that the world is definitely longing for the king to come back. right? Like where we definitely see like we need the king to return, and we need him to establish his kingdom, and he needs to have actually create rule in this place where everyone is just falling apart. And so like you would think, right, that who wants to pray for Dallas, that there would be kind of like silence in the room, maybe kind of like this awkward waiting thing. And there was at first, like, you know, people just kind of very tentatively got up and were like, Lord, you know, we just want to pray for Dallas, and we want to, amen. And then they would take a candle and place it on the map, right in the place where they had prayed for, like effectively, right, bringing light to the world that was otherwise in darkness. But as we kept going on and kept reading these stories, what you began to see was that people were literally, not figuratively, literally running, like jumping up and running to get up to the map. So I had anticipated that there would be like one kid praying for each thing. But by the end of this thing, the whole map was like surrounded by these young people, right, who were eager to pray for their world, who were eager to ask God to come and do something. And to me, that was like this crowning moment where I realized like this is something that they've never done before. This is something that they're hungry for, that says this matters. What we believe matters. It's not just a psychology. It's not just some self-help. It's not a list of rules. It's actually about a God who ministers to his world that is hurting. And if we, I think, had that narrative more, that our God is a ministering God, that our God comes to us to heal us, to act in us, to act in our world, to do things, right? If we didn't just theologize God is a creator, but rather really had a sense of God creating, that God is a healer, but we had a sense of God healing, then I think we would begin to see like, oh, people believe that this really matters. Oh, this really does matter because it's a God who is active, a God who does things, a God who breaks through that brass ceiling that otherwise just seems like it can't be penetrated in any real way, and becomes super oppressive in the meantime. So I think that like that really is what I wonder about for ministry. Again, not how do we keep young people in the church, but rather how do we facilitate encounters with the divine? How do we actually construct our ministries in a way that they're doing the stuff that the church does? I mean, that whole exercise, that whole whatever you want to call it, right? It's really born out of the litany of the divine liturgy, right? For the peace of the whole world. Like that's what we pray for every Sunday. What we did was you just prayed for that specifically in different places, for peace here and for peace there and for peace here and for peace here and for peace here, which is the whole world. You know, like that, like, we just did it a lot quicker in the liturgy. But if we kind of like zoomed in on those liturgical moments and found ways of giving them flesh in some way, I think that we would begin to see like the hearts of young people come alive a little bit.
I have a related question to all of this that I think something that I feel like your department and my department shares in common. I'm curious, but I'm always trying to read something or learn something or brush up. Like I don't feel like I've arrived. You know, like I do,
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing evangelism full time for a long time, and I'm like not done learning at all. And I plan on learning for as long as I can. You know, I want to be a lifelong learner, basically.
Yeah,
I feel
totally.
like you guys are always, you read this book, you know, or you read that book, and I love that. So I'm curious, what are you reading right now? Or
Right
are you
now?
taking a break? What you're reading right now? What's the last book you read?
Oh man, I'm the kind of person that always has like 7 books nearby. Look, watch, I'll just show you. I'm gonna take both my hands right here, and I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna do this.
Yeah, there you go.
See, like there's just so many things. So I'm doing a couple of them. I've been reading Saint Silouan the Athonite, the life of Saint Silouan, which is so good, and he's just amazing. That's been a real treat for me. I'm also reading for fun. I'm about 20 pages short of finishing The Two Towers, so I'm trying to do a little bit more fun reading in my life. You know, because I feel like just I go down like the intellectual rabbit hole way more than I should, because I'm not really an intellectual, but like I like smart people and I like listening to things smart people say, and I hope that like some of it will rub off on me. But I'm also reading a book called The New Media Epidemic.
I just picked that up. I haven't started it yet, but I'm so excited about reading it.
I want to just like throw my phone away. I'm like, get it away. I don't want any of it. Nobody.
I mean, I saw the author, I saw the title, and I was sold.
Yep,
like,
totally.
It wasn't even an issue. Like, I bought it on the spot.
Yep. Yeah, it's haunting, man. It'll ruin you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're gonna be like, no more Facebook. I'm done with these chats.
No more stories that work. It's over.
Yeah. Only stories that don't work.
Yeah.
Just kidding. That doesn't make
well,
sense.
We've pretty much reached our time limit, but we do have like 30 to 60 seconds if you want to give any parting words or encouragement for someone. Like, what's the next step?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the encouragement that I would give, honestly, is like, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to like try new things, and really like construct like different opportunities for your young people to touch the divine. Like, I mean, there's just, I don't know. I mean, I say the more you can in your ministries get out of your head and into your hands, the more you can get out of your head and into your heart, the better off you're going to be. And I think part of the reason that things like this are great stories that work, right? Like we're narrative people. We learn from stories in a way that we don't learn from anything else. C.S. Lewis, yet again, right? He talks about, how actually this is going to be a gross paraphrase, so please forgive me. But he talks about the beauty of things, even just like fairy tales and fictional stories, as ways to awaken the heart. Because a lot of times, we get like the Sunday school story and like Jesus did this and Jesus did that and and we kind of know it. We've become kind of calloused to it. And the way that Lewis describes it is that there's these dragons that kind of like guard the door of the heart. And when something comes at it like that, it doesn't penetrate. But when there's a story that's crafted that has the same truth, that has the same overall thing that we're trying to bring people toward, that can actually creep around the dragons that keep watch over the heart, and finally actually have an effect on them. So that's what that was pointing to his whole thing with Narnia, was he wanted to present the gospel in a way that was stripped of its Sunday school decorations, which I think is so cool. And I think the more that we in ministry, if we really want our ministries to break through the brass ceiling, I think we need to become bards. We need to become storytellers. We need to craft a narrative of the world, or really, and not even craft it, but really reclaim the actual narrative of God and God's people, as a way to break through, I think, the brass ceiling, and to find ways to give people entry points into actually touching and tasting of that story.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that we need to be better storytellers. One of my favorite things to do lately is I love to tell either parables or stories from the Bible, but not reference the Bible. Like, you don't know that I'm telling a story from the Bible until you get to the very end.
Yeah.
And so, but if you just kind of, these stories are timeless, and if you just kind of lift them out and just tell the story for the sake of the ... and not say, well, the Bible says ... all of a sudden the story life returns to that story, which was already there, but we kind of strip it away the way you said. Like, yeah. So that's encouraging to hear.
That's a really good point. I think, because the minute we even say like the Bible or whatever, like there's something in us that gets guarded, right? Like, we know, like, oh, we're about to hear that we're wrong. Or like, we're about to hear that like we've done something bad. Or if you're my kids, right? Like, we follow a pretty strict paleo diet, which means that like the even like the sweets we make aren't even like really like desserts, really. And so we've just dropped the word paleo from our language, and so we don't say these are paleo brownies. We're just like, here are brownies. And they're like, we don't say here's paleo chips, and they're like, oh, chips. Here's paleo. Like, say granola bars.
Exactly. So if you just tell the story still is beautiful and touching. But as soon as we couch it in, but it's like we kill the story. We're killing the stories when referencing them in these old ways that doesn't bring the story to life.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, 100%. We're pretty much out of time. I'm really appreciative for all the work that you're doing, your department's doing. I'm gonna give a little bit of a tease here. for those watching, Christian and Steve and I are working on a secret project, and it feels really good to tell you that I can't tell you what it is, but I want you to know that it's amazing once you start, like, once you believe in something and you really get involved, all this work is starting to happen underground, and it takes a while for it to come to fruition. But these guys are working, I'm working, we're all working hard, in these different areas of ministry, because I think the best way to wrap this is what you talk about, is to help us facilitate those encounters with the divine. And that's what it's all about. And when we see a child or a young adult or a teen experience that, whether it's in the liturgy or whether it's in a youth group discussion or whether prayer, at home at the dinner table, that something has shifted in their heart.
Mm.
And so I think that's a great way to sum up what we've talked about, is that's what your department is doing, is helping. How do we help them have an encounter with the divine? And that's really what it's about. So thank you for reshifting that question. How do we keep our kids in the church? Sharing that story about the candles and the prayer. I think that's a great story. I love borrowing great ideas. So
dude,
we're going to do that at my church.
Yeah, take it, please.
Yeah. And you saw all the books that you held up. So that's it for today. That's it for Stories That Work. I really appreciate you coming on, Christian. I know you're busy.
It was a joy. Thank you for having me.
Okay. God bless.